Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I am Rosehanna Chowdhury, CEO of the UK Resilience Academy, and it's a real pleasure to be here at Cyber UK to chair this panel discussion from rehearsal to reality. Welcome to everyone here in the conference centre in Glasgow and to the many joining us on the live stream as well. I think we gather here at a key moment, and a sobering one, that cyber attacks on our critical national infrastructure are no longer hypothetical. It's not a question of if, but when. And the outcome of that will be determined by how well organizations prepare to respond, to adapt, and to recover. And preparedness isn't built on paper. We have seen time and again that the organizations that prepare the best and kind of respond in the heat of an incident is not the ones with the most detailed plans. It is the ones that have rehearsed those decisions under pressure, exposed gaps, tested assumptions, and learnt from that, and built that confidence to act early and decisively. And the broader point here is also that national cyber resilience is not something that any one organization can deliver alone. In a truly interconnected system, the strength of our resilience lies in how well we work together. And that's exactly what our panel will explore today, how we move beyond compliance into real operational readiness. I'm delighted to be joined by an exceptional panel that will help us unpack that. We have less than an hour and lots of ground to cover, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and to do so coming in on the first question. Jessica, if I start with you and work my way across. Looking ahead to the next decade, how can the UK strengthen its resilience so that our most critical infrastructure organizations can respond to and recover from cyber attacks in this ever-increasing threat landscape?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here at Cyber UK. I'm Jess Colvin. I am the Global Head of Cyber Operations for Citigroup globally. And thank you for the question. My role is obviously global, but I'm based in the UK and I'm very much part of the UK cyber community. Look, I think the challenges that we're facing as a country and from on the cyber threat landscape are very severe right now, and that's something that we're deeply concerned about. For my opinion, the best way that we can get in front of this, firstly, is understand the threat. Really understand what threats we're facing, what threats the critical national infrastructure is facing, and find ways to work together to get in front of that threat. I will say quite often that I think cyber is a team sport. Our ecosystem is so interconnected that we have to work together and partner, whether that's sharing intelligence, whether that's sharing best practices, sharing common best practice around guidelines, standards, etc. It is absolutely a team sport, and for us as an industry to get ahead and to really get in front of this, those are the areas where I think we should be focusing and spending our time.
Brilliant. Blake, can I bring you in to introduce yourself and then come in on that question as well?
Sure. I'm Blake Darche. I work for Cloudflare, and I'm head of our threat intel, threat response, and basically all customer security response operations. I do think, the threat landscape has changed a lot, over the last 5-10 years. At one point back in, the early 2000s, people were worried about files and this file coming in by email. And then, the threat landscape changed to like a link, and now we've got multiple cloud providers that threat actors are leveraging to run complex attacks through. And I think the value of threat sharing is paramount and critical to addressing the long-term viability of not just critical infrastructure, but every business in the country, of all countries. On an average day, my team looks at thousands of different cyber attacks impacting all sorts of different, infrastructure. And I think being able to share that knowledge with others helps with response and getting ahead of the next threat.
Brilliant. Now, Louise, can I bring you in as well on that question?
Yeah. So hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. So I'm Eloise Hines. I'm the Deputy CISO at the Bank of England. And yeah, I'd echo much of what's been said. I think we talk at Bank of England about severe but plausible scenarios, and what's plausible has changed significantly over recent years. And I think, particularly when we start thinking about exercising, the times when exercising and rehearsal really lights up the imagination of the defenders and you can see people are engaged is when they do feel like it's plausible. So the more that we can run scenarios which are based on attacks that we've actually seen in the wild, attacks that we've seen other companies face, or attacks that have even we've seen ourselves face but maybe have been near misses because our defences have kicked in, that's when you get people who are really engaged, because it is believable and it's not theatre at that point, it's something they can see is tangible and is coming quickly.
Yeah. And I think continuing on that theme, Jessica, the finance sector is often seen as setting the benchmark for exercising and recovery. What specific practices, particularly around testing and rehearsing, have made the biggest difference, do you think, in real incidents?
Yeah, thank you. And look, I think organisations the size of global financial services and also UK financial services do a few things really well. The first thing is rehearsing for that bad day before the bad day happens, rehearsing frequently and often. In my experience, I've seen organisations run both company-wide cyber exercises, cyber scenarios involving the key decision makers that will be required on a bad day. Like reaching outside of the cyber team, I think, is a really important part of rehearsing for a bad day. It's very rare that a cyber event is limited and impacted just the cyber organisation. Now, rehearsing the cyber team for their bad day is really important as well, because we need to know what we're doing. We have to be ready for that and understand it. But getting the gamification of key decision makers around dealing with untrusted third parties, dealing with specific maybe vulnerability exploits, dealing with DDoS type attacks, you know, having that decision-making process ready to go, we find very helpful. And that's certainly helpful across financial services. Equally, talking with boards, chief executives, senior leadership, helping them understand their role during a cyber event and during a cyber crisis before the cyber crisis happens means you can iron out kinks in that process. If there are certain decisions that didn't go well during an exercise or during a scenario, you can rectify it. The other thing that I see that works really well is after actions. So hot washes, after actions, whatever we may call them. Having a blame-free environment where the teams can come together, talk about what went well, what didn't go well, how can we improve. There's real value in that and there's real richness in that. And again, it allows organizations to make sure that they're learning from those experiences in a productive and positive way, updating run books, updating decision flows, tweaking training, again, before your bad day happens. And then the other piece of that is really sharing best practices with other organizations. You know, certain exercises that may be done by one organization, may be done differently by another, and even sharing recovery practices as well. You know, bare metal restores is certainly something that we're talking a lot about across industry at the moment. There's a few different ways to do it. We were talking about that backstage, weren't we? You know, what's best for your organization may not be best for another, but having that conversation, sharing and learning, for me, means that we get really good at these things. And so when the bad day happens, the muscle memory kicks in and you're not reliant on trying to find the run book and remind yourself of how that works. I think one final point I make is the different type of event requires a different level of response. So are you emulating a firm-wide crisis, or are you emulating a geographical event, a smaller event which is limited to a certain set of business transactions, capabilities, whatever that may be? I think mature organizations go across the full spectrum. You know, no two cyber events are the same, and having a cookie cutter approach wouldn't necessarily work well during a crisis. So you're testing that agility, flexibility, muscle memory, which is very helpful during a real event.
Yeah, I like the get ready for a bad day strap. We might use that strap line in the Resilience Academy, I think.
Feel free.
Might catch on. Blake, can I bring you in? From your perspective, what needs to change in terms of enabling more effective real-time threat information sharing between industry and government, and how critical is that to raising resilience in CNI?
I do think it's critical, and I think, you know, more threat sharing needs to happen automatically. And I think it's been difficult to do that historically. It feels like we share information, or organizations attempt to share it, but they often result in kind of missing context, and then there's humans trying to basically chat with each other on a chat service. And I think it continues to be a challenge. I think with like kind of the advancement in AI, we'll see better information sharing over time. You know, it used to be the most complex part of threat sharing was parsing data and trying to put it in the right format and everything. And I think with some AI tools, that's become rather trivial. And as a result, we'll see faster sharing of information and more structured markdown files long-term versus kind of these, I would call them PDF reports. I think the age of the PDF report is dead with AI tools. And I think we'll see kind of that shift and that will be helpful in speeding information sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Eloise, if we look at what role can policy and regulation play in this space from your perspective in looking at how quickly we can recover from cyber incidents?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the bank has two perspectives or two roles in this, and we have a whole regulatory arm, which I'm not a part of, so I won't talk explicitly to that. But certainly within the bank itself as an institution, as an operator of critical national infrastructure, we think about, what is the regulation that we're expecting of other firms, and how do we make sure that we're meeting those similar standards? So some of the things that they're expecting of firms that have proved really useful when we think about this internally is, as I say, there's kind of plausible but severe scenarios, thinking as well about what our important business services are. So when you're explaining to people, look, if this were to be a catastrophic outage, and just because that's what you're right, there's kind of full spectrum of events, but if you think the very worst case, catastrophic outage, we're not going to get the entire organization back and up and working as we expected anytime soon. What are the most important parts, and what are the most important parts of those important services? So what does a minimum viable version of some of those things look like? And then what do those require to run? And I think it's just about framing the questions that you want everyone to be thinking about together. And then, yeah, that kind of point about it being a team sport. So how do we make sure that we're all sharing those lessons and reflecting about that ourselves? And how do we help each other out? Because, it's a sector, well, it's the entire organization, the entire country has to think about how it works together. And these things very rarely impact a single firm. A catastrophic outage in a firm, particularly one that's kind of fundamental, isn't just going to impact them, it's going to impact all their suppliers, and Jaguar Land Rover was a great example of that. So making sure that we are kind of taking a team approach and thinking about this collectively, I think is really important.
Brilliant. Jessica, initially a question for you, but Eloise, I might throw the same your way as well. The financial sector is well established in the way that it works transparently across organizations, sharing threat understanding, novel approaches in resilience. What makes this work well, and what are the challenges, do you think, to transparency?
Yeah, thank you. So in addition to my role at Citibank, I'm also a board member of the Financial Services ISAC, which is a global organisation with presence in the UK and Europe. And the information and threat sharing is integral to our collective ecosystem. And Ellie mentioned about us being an interconnected ecosystem, and particularly in financial services, there's a highly intricate nature of the overall financial ecosystem, which means that if a competitor bank is having a bad day, it likely means that the whole street is having a bad day. So with that understanding, the information sharing is not about competition, it's about making sure that the entire ecosystem is protected. It works really well when the information sharing is through trusted forums. So ISAC being one, there are a number of those trusted forums also within the UK and within the financial services community, because they essentially are bound by sharing agreements, which obviously is very important. The sharing itself, we tend to use traffic light protocols, which again is a really important wrapper around the way that the sharing is done. But we find it very helpful because quite often there's time-sensitive information that perhaps one organisation is seeing that another organisation may be seeing another part of it. We can bring that together and get the full story about what's happening. Also, perhaps one organisation hasn't quite caught it, needs to know it because they're also impacted, and it makes the whole community safer. And we find that really works well globally as well as across the UK and in other regions. The barriers come, I think, in a few places. So I wouldn't say barriers, challenges to this is the point that Blake made around the signal to noise ratio. There's a lot that goes on across the ecosystem, and having a way to filter that information, and that's where you get great access to smaller trusted groups that are similar type of organization to yours, whether it's the financial services or another industry stripe, we find that very helpful, and also kind of using technology to help us with that. But it's such an important part of what we do within internal to our organization, but also within the ISAC community as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Eloise, how about from your perspective, what is working well and what are the challenges, do you think, to transparency across the sector?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo much of what's been said, and I think the financial sector is in a relatively strong place, and it's partly because it's just been taking this stuff seriously for a longer time and has had, to be honest, the money and the investment and the buy-in at senior levels to do that in a way that other industries have struggled to get often. And so certainly as a sector, I think there's opportunity. There's also a responsibility then to go out and share and kind of make sure that we are helping uplift those other sectors who maybe have had slightly less investment. And certainly we work with kind of critical national infrastructure providers across other industries as well to make sure that we're talking about what works and what doesn't. But while recognizing there's things that the finance sector does well, I was also really struck by the conversation earlier around thinking differently about problems and looking to other sectors. And so the point that was being made about kind of airline security as an example, and thinking actually in terms of cyber safety rather than just cyber security and everyone's responsibility. And I think sometimes one of the challenges can be in a financial sector that people assume you're doing it well. They assume you've got a well-funded cyber team or you've got a well-funded technology department, and therefore maybe that problem is solved or that problem is being tackled by other people. It's handled. And so trying to say, actually, no, everyone has a real role to play and everyone has a responsibility. And again, one of the benefits of doing exercises that involve a wider group of people and saying, actually, you're going to need to make business decisions at this point that we will not have an opinion on necessarily. So we might say what technically can be brought up in what order, but which of those is the right thing to do for the organization and the business actually is going to require you. So one of the challenges of having a mature kind of cyber capability within the finance sector is potentially people think it's the cyber team's problem to solve, and it never is. So trying to make sure that we tackle some of that, I think, is important.
Yeah, exactly. It's working across those domains, isn't it, as well, in terms of how you build out across. Blake, if I can come to you, we've just spoken about transparency and sharing within the financial sector, where it works well and perhaps not so well. Interested to hear your perspective on how this could work across sectors. What is needed to generate the trust for that information sharing, and who is responsible, do you think, for making that happen?
Yeah,
quite a lot in that question, but
yeah, I think that there's like this is a great spot for government to get involved and help with like some cross-sector sharing. I think there's often this hesitancy to share information even within sectors due to risk, people wanting to control the information. Like there's a lot of, I'll call it inter-organizational politics that occur in these organizations, regulated or not regulated. And I think, government has an interesting role to play there because they're more of a intermediary that's neutral, and they're not, necessarily trying to profit from information. And so I think in the traditional world of like cybersecurity vendors, you often end up with all the different vendors are like, we have no interest in working with each other because they're not financially motivated to work with each other. So that's why we see that not going well. But I do think the government has an interesting role to play there. In pseudo-government organizations like FSISAC or ARC and things of that nature, I think have been playing a role there, and I think they're still trying to figure out what that role is. But I think over time, as that gets more flushed out, that will become valuable.
Jessica, Louise, can I get your response to that in terms of what you think would work well around increasing that transparency across sectors? What else can other sectors learn from this?
Yeah, I think Blake was right, and certainly on the financial side, and I'll come on to the other sectors in a minute, that the pseudo-government organisations do a really nice job of working across sectors to kind of get that information out and get the information sharing. I think working with other sectors, we do see some really good partnerships that tend to be a little bit more ad hoc around kind of outside of industry, kind of finance, working with insurance as an example. And there are some really good there's some great thinking that comes out of those organizations and out of those information sharings. I think it's a matter of the need and the threat warranting it, and having a set of ground truths that the organizations want to anchor themselves to for a specific conversation. So for example, if we warranted ourselves into a conversation around a certain attack or a certain path, the pathways tend to then be much smoother. Generic information sharing for the sake of information sharing doesn't necessarily go well. Where we have a common mission and a common aim, that's where I've seen that be successful. I don't know if you've seen that too.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the pseudo-government organizations and have gotten better over time, and I think continue to evolve. And I think people have to be willing to put in the effort, though.
Yep.
And they have to have the time. And one of the things we were talking about backstage is just how complex the threat landscape is. You're often really divided on your time trying to manage all of this. And I think we'll see a lot of cases where the cybersecurity workforce of today will shift with AI tooling. And as people begin building automated response capabilities with different AI agents that each company maintains, we're going to see that traditional software engineers are not necessarily needed, but the best responder in the future is going to be someone who can put together the subject matter expertise into an AI agent for their organization. That is going to be the future of cybersecurity response and detection. And I think we're at the dawn of that right now. We're just like, it's starting to become clear, but we're not quite there yet.
Now, Louise, can I bring you in on that in terms of the challenges that Blake's just outlined there, and that issue around information sharing and the role of government and industry in that? Can I bring you in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, echo much of what's already been said. I think where we see really successful things, and again, kind of thinking about scenarios and exercising, we do lots of kind of cross-industry, and again, I'm using the royal, it's more the regulatory side of the house, but they do really interesting exercises where you get a lot of organisations together. And one successful thing, which I was kind of part of, playing the seesaw of a failing institution, that was quite useful because, to Jessica's point, it gives you something quite specific to be focused on. So if there was a bank that was failing, how would these other institutions kind of react? And what information would they need in order to be able to preserve their business, in order to look after the sector more broadly? And again, doing that in a fictional scenario where no one bank was being penalised, we were a fictional organisation that was having a bad day, we could then say, actually, all of these firms would need to know X, Y, Z, and you would hope that kind of practicing that, seeing that play out, and realising, actually, we would need to share, we would expect this organisation would share quite transparently with us for us to be able to respond and work out where we wanted to kind of reconnect with them, where we wanted to kind of maintain our relationships, or where we needed to isolate them fully. You would hope that enough of that practice means that if it were to happen to a real institution, then they're more likely to say, yes, we would share, because we would need other people to share with us. So you kind of get that practice, you get that muscle memory of, actually, this is where the intel is important, this is where we can't just go and talk to our lawyers before we share anything, because actually that's not what would help us if we were the kind of peers of this organisation. So you're hoping kind of some of those things. And again, I think as the regulator, there's a good role that we could play in putting together some of those scenarios, in gathering those people together and encouraging them to try those things out and to see the impacts.
One thing I would add as well is, the NCSC have done a really nice job of sharing information with organisations across the UK on specific threats. And those have been incredibly well received by not just the finance sector, but also across the UK as well. And that's really something that we'd love to see more of, and for that partnership to continue to grow and develop, because there's a really important role for them to play there. Kind of back to your earlier question about the UK sector and how we see that, kind of making sure we're securing that moving forward. I think there's a tremendous role there to play, and that ultimately is, as we know, their mission.
Absolutely. And I mean, the theme of the panel is from rehearsal to reality. And I'm wondering what your top tips are around how you make that rehearsal feel really real. Because from my experience, when you do that, that is when people say, well, actually, shouldn't we have the whole department on this? And what's your top tip on making it real, getting the investment in the first place, but actually then making it real in terms of learning and exposing and testing those assumptions and so forth? Jessica, can I start with you on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think let me do three.
Go for it.
My first top tip would be have the senior leadership, whether board, CEO, or whatever senior leadership means to you, have them understand the value of what you're doing. That certainly makes things feel real because there's meaning to it, there's outcomes to it, there's a clear path to we are going to improve our organization by what we learn, and you're getting your folks involved for a meaningful purpose. The second one is my team do not appreciate me for this, but occasionally we run no-notice exercises, and that certainly brings an element of reality to it. But we don't do that often. They are obviously planned within our secure environments, but nonetheless, that is an important part of exercising, is having conflicting priorities, perhaps having a key decision maker on a train or a plane or not available. Again, like back to my earlier point about muscle memory, that's a really important part, and that would be a top tip for me is, don't do your exercises at the same time in the same place with the same group of people. Think about how you can keep it interesting. And the third thing is involve your entire cyber team. Bring your technical people to the table, because your incident responders and your SOC analysts, your forensics teams, they will always have something to add, and that brings the realness because you're getting lots of perspectives from different members of your organization, and they will really help you understand if there are problems there that you need to fix.
Absolutely agree. Blake, can I ask you? You can also have 3.
I would say every incident your team responds to should be treated like it is a crisis. Okay, so we should be practicing responding to even, an employee's lost laptop. Is it really lost, or did someone steal it? All right, and so I think the best practice in rehearsing for these larger events is that you practice every time like this is the one that matters. And I think that's about having the right incident command structure, having the right incident commander, to your point about having someone's out of office. Someone's always out of office, to be perfectly frank. In every business, someone's out of office all the time. So those are great opportunities. I think, you just need to be practicing as you would, and that's a success.
Brilliant, thank you. And Eloise?
Yeah, again, kind of echoing much of what was said, I think doing it regularly and doing it often. So when, I remember historically perhaps some of our exercising was kind of long in the making, very elaborate plans, huge cast lists, and as a result it could feel a little bit like a performance because we did get very senior buy-in, but almost because of that no one wanted to look like they didn't know what they were doing in the scenario. So what you're doing is a play and not actually really testing a challenge. So we do something, as well as some of those big set pieces which are really important and do get the right buy-in, we also do something called Pizza in a Puzzle, and we do it every other month, and it's short and it's sharp and it's just, here's a challenge, how we deal with this, how will we respond to that. And I think, that's super important in the muscle memory and not preempting it. So the puzzle isn't known until people get into the room. I think that's important. I think the point you were making around testing assumptions. So often you'll come out and you'll say, what will we do if? And someone will say, oh yes, we have this process. And you're like, right, who is doing what? How long is that step taking you? When did you last do that? What devices do you need? And also, again, to the point around out of office, if someone is going through that really well, say, right, imagine this person is out. Who else in the room can talk me through the same steps with the same clarity and the same focus as that person? Because they might be on leave, they might be on a plane somewhere, we have no access to them. Does everyone else know the same as well as that person? And then I think the third point that we try and make, and exercising is great, rehearsing is even better, actually practically doing it. That's really, really useful to show not only can you talk about it theoretically, but actually can you do these response actions, can you show them? But also then being really conscious, and someone said to me, it's really important to practice, but also you don't practice heart surgery on someone who's healthy just to show you can. So you also need to be really conscious that some of that stuff it's just risky to do, operationally risky to do, some of that rehearsing. And so where you can, being able to have kind of test environments or places where you can do a bit more play and demonstration is really important, because sometimes, and we're a old institution, we have legacy estate to work in. You do need to think about where actually in trying to practice something you might cause more harm than good. So really being very thoughtful about where you do that, I think is really important as well.
I think as well, sorry, I'll just add in again, one other aspect I just thought of it is around the involving third parties.
Yeah.
So involving your key partners that you would need on your bad day, outside of the walls of your organisation. And also on the UK finance side, there's some fantastic broad sector simulations that we as a collective community have learnt from. And again, that's another really interesting and useful thing to participate in.
I think also something to always be in mind, I think some people, to your point on the out of office, people are like, well, that person's out of office, oh, that's just made up. I can tell you firsthand, like at Cloudflare, we had an incident like 2 years ago or 3 years ago now on Thanksgiving Day in the United States. The entire US business is effectively closed, right? No one is working. And a Russian attack group is trying to come in to hack into our infrastructure on Thanksgiving Day. Do you think that that's random? No, it's not random. Like, these people know that the majority of a company is going to be off that day, and they decide they're going to run an operation on that day. And so, I think sometimes employees think, hey, like, this is all made up. This would never happen. This would happen. This is all true. One of the largest cybersecurity incidents I ever responded to, and there were like 200,000 computers down that have been wiped out with a burning picture of an American flag. And in that incident, it occurred during a religious holiday in that country. You think that's random? It's not random, right? Like, the threat actor knows what they're doing, and they're testing you by running their operations then. And I think often people don't see that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can't remember the last time I had any cyber crisis or cyber event happen Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Typically doesn't.
And I think I start all my exercises by saying, do not fight the scenario, because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And I think also rehearsing can only help in reality if we learn lessons, right? And I wonder what your reflections are on, and I keep saying this at Academy, which is, it's not lessons learned, it's lessons identified. Yeah. It only becomes lessons learned when you've been through that journey to do the hard yards on it. What are your reflections on how, once you've got the investment to rehearse, to get the investment to then take the time, the resources, the money, whatever that requires, to then make a difference in reality? Blake, can I start with you?
Yeah, I think, doing after-action reports is really, really impactful. We do those often at Cloudflare and look at what went well, what didn't go well. It's not that we're trying to blame someone, but knowing, like, hey, this didn't go well here, we missed something. And being aware of that is critical to closing your points of vulnerability and preventing the next incident from, going awry, right? And so I think learning from those things is really impactful. And I think over the longer term, like back to kind of like the AI agent integration side, I think putting those lessons of what didn't go well into your playbooks that can be instrumented by humans and AI tools are critical to moving things forward and being able to prepare for the next one.
Eloise.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. And yeah, we call our after action reports post-incident reviews, and you're absolutely right. It's lessons identified, and then sometimes what we've done is we've used a post-incident review then maybe as the basis for a pizza and a puzzle. So we do that several months later, and you go, actually, and maybe you tweak the scenario a little because you'd hope we've fixed the point problem, but actually have we fixed the broader piece? So you'll go through and say, well, you said at the time that this not having this log available or not having this was a problem. If it happened tomorrow, have we actually changed that? Have we actually gone and dealt with it? So not assuming that just because you've talked about something that it's actually been done, and revisiting some of those same scenarios again and again, I think can bring it to light. And it's embarrassing if after several months you're coming and saying, no, actually that would still work because we haven't closed the gap and we've just done the identification. And yeah, we've talked a lot, certainly within my team, about saying it's better to identify less and actually fix them than identify a million things and just leave them hanging out there. It's not very useful if all you're doing is pointing at problems. You have to then go and close them down and fix them. So really focusing on, as you say, learning the lesson, not just identifying it, is crucial.
Jessica.
Yeah, thank you. I think ruthless prioritization is helpful in these situations to understand, coming out of any resiliency scenario, if there are lessons identified, which one should I fix first? to get the biggest risk reduction for my organization, or the biggest resiliency gain, however you want to look at it. How I've seen this really done well is looking at the lessons identified in terms of people, process, tech. On the people side, do our team members and do team members of the organizations, do they know their role? Do they have an understanding of the things they need to do, the decisions that need to be made, or do we have uplift there? On the process side, which processes work really well, which failed, which ones do we need to address? Or on the tech side, do we have a technology gap? Do we have a control failure or a weakness that we've identified? And bucketing them that way, and then prioritizing aggressively, really helps get to the point of, these are the list of things that I want to fix, versus maybe the below the line of the list of things that didn't necessarily go as well as we had hoped, but fundamentally weren't a failure, they weren't a control failing. So we tend to think about it in those kind of two different buckets of things we need to absolutely fix now, which are very important, and things that kind of fall below the line as, incremental improvements or enhancements.
Yep, and you touched on people there and training there to an extent as well. I guess one of my reflections, again, from an academy perspective is, you can have all the most detailed plans, but if you don't have a trained, competent human in the midst of it, operating those plans, then going from rehearsal to reality is far more difficult. What would you say in terms of what you're doing at City and so forth around training your teams and your staff to be able to kind of then operate from rehearsal to reality?
Yeah, and look, at risk of repeating myself, cyber is a team sport, and not just at City, but across the whole ecosystem. We're only as good as our weakest link, and there's the cyber team angle to that, but there's also the rest of the organization angle. Every single human in the organization has access to a computer. Those computers are, ingress points for any number of, cyber targets, phishing emails, etc. So number one is we have to have a baseline of expectations of workforce, but also providing training, guidance, support, as well as the technology controls that get applied across organizations of how to spot phishing emails, annual training for team members on spotting cyber attacks, spotting fraud attacks, how to report them, making it easy for individuals to report them. That's such an important part of any organizational culture, is harnessing the people around you. Cyber isn't just the job of the cyber team.
Absolutely. Eloise?
Yeah, absolutely. And something we've done at the bank quite recently, we're kind of thinking about crisis management as a profession across the institution, and recognizing actually we have the number of people in cyber who are focused on those kind of crises, but actually we have teams who focus on very different kind of crises. So maybe the failure of a bank. Are there skills that they have from dealing with those very different sorts of crises that we could think about and reflect within our response to cybersecurity? And similarly, are there skills that we pick up from responding to operational or cyber crises that would be useful and interesting? So thinking about those much broader skills. So how do I summarize information very quickly to allow decision makers? How do I deal with uncertainty, and what do I present? How do I keep a track of the decisions I'm making and the information I had at the time I was making those decisions, so I can revisit and evaluate if they were the right things to do? So really thinking about that skill set more broadly, and then also what are the different roles to play, because not everyone needs to be in the midst of a thing, and everyone loves to be hands on keyboards at the point at which a crisis is happening, but actually there's different roles for different people to play. There is a need for people to be independent who can then come and help revisit and look back, reflect after a crisis has been there. And if you've been in the midst of it, maybe you're a bit more defensive, maybe that's trickier to do if you have played a role at that point. So identifying the strengths and the weaknesses and the roles that different people can play, and then trying to get new ways of thinking and new ways of looking at problems, I think is really interesting. And it's something, I'm quite excited about, that kind of crisis management more generally, and trying to share those lessons across very different sorts of crisis response.
Absolutely. Blake, can I bring you in on that?
Yeah, I think, there's always the employee that's like, I want to go to this conference to get training. And I'm like, you should be running the training at that conference, right? And that's my immediate response to people is like, don't you know how to do that as part of your job already? And if you don't, why don't you know that? And so I think, the concept of just like, hey, we're going to send like 200 people to some class is inherently flawed, right? Like, if the employees in your organization can't learn and train themselves, we're failing as leaders. And there's no way to necessarily train your cybersecurity workforce on everything they possibly need to know, because we just don't know what they need to know, right? Like, I get inside, I look at an incident sometimes, and I'm learning things I didn't even know existed, right? Like, and this happens, I think, to everyone. And you're like, hey, they got access to the system. I didn't know what that system was. I didn't even know we had that system. Why are we doing that? Is the first thing that I often think is like, why did that happen? And this wasn't a good idea. Who approved this idea? You know what I mean? And I think employees need to be adaptable, and they need to be able to kind of innovate and self-learn. And I think those are really important skills. And it's not to say like an online training tool like Hack the Box or something isn't useful, but I think employees need to be naturally inquisitive in the cybersecurity world in order to succeed. And it's really a core requirement.
I would just add, I think there is then a responsibility as leaders to give them the opportunity to do that, because I think sometimes there's this tendency that when there's something live or there's something important, actually we'll just get the A team in, we'll just get the people who are super experienced, we'll just get these people in. And actually, if you never expose anyone else to those opportunities or those difficult discussions or those scenarios, they never will be ready, and then you never will build up the kind of strength. So if you have those people who are inquisitive and are adaptable, even if they've never been in a scenario like this before, get them in the room, and maybe they just sit and listen, but maybe actually they've got a different way of thinking about things, and kind of trying to make sure you create spaces and opportunities where less experienced staff might get an opportunity, may see how these things play out, is really important and hard to do in the moment when you're, the tendency is I just need the stellar performers, but you'll never grow the next generation unless you bring them in.
Completely agree, and I think that constant curiosity can be a superpower in how we can build resilience as well. We're getting to the final part of our discussion. So I'll start with Eloise. How can other CNI sectors, particularly those without the same level of regulatory or financial resources, learn from your sector?
Yeah, I think it does come back to the team sport element, and as we've talked about a lot, one of the reasons the financial sector has benefited is because those firms work together, and they are better resourced individually than lots of other sectors are collectively. If at least the sectors can do is kind of pool collective resources, think about those things as a whole, where there are shared third parties or shared vendors, working with them again as a collective is going to be easier, because a third party is more likely to engage with the whole sector than they might be for an individual institution, especially if your relationship with them might be relatively small. So trying to find opportunities to work as a group and not consider each other competitors, because as we've all said in the cyber world, we're all on the same team. I think that would probably be my key is thinking about yourself as a combined group rather than trying to handle it as an institution, because it's just too difficult to try and do on your own.
Jessica?
Yeah, look, I echo that. I think partnership is really the key here. Like I mentioned, the ecosystem, whether it be financial or otherwise, is so interconnected that the best chance that we have of success is really about working together and pulling in those various organizations. I also think that the NCSC do a nice job there. There's a ton of opportunity for us at industry, and maybe that's a call to arms from the conversation today, is for the groups to think about how we can partner more collectively together across the various industries and also the various CNI sectors.
And Blake?
Yeah, I would echo what you said, which is, we need to think about how to partner with other people, just on everything we're doing. There's somebody might be more specialized, some other entity in an area that you didn't even know you needed help with. So you all of a sudden find, hey, my router's been compromised and someone's running custom malware on it. Your team may be ill-equipped to respond to that, simply because they're not. Even as a forensic investigator, they may not be familiar with router forensics. And so I think pushing kind of the envelope of building, community with other organizations is super powerful and helpful. And I think, we often as humans, when we hear hey, something happened, most companies I notify of a major cyber incident do not even respond. And they're like, we couldn't be compromised. And I was like, no, you are compromised. And they're like, how? And so, third parties are a huge risk area for most businesses. And I think we're seeing that a lot today. and it's expanded over the last year or two, where just third-party breaches are causing a lot of impact to businesses. And it's really, really tough on third-party stuff. And once you're connected with a third party, your data is just going somewhere. And how much do you trust that third party, kind of from a community perspective? Like, your major third parties, are you familiar with their response processes? And do you know who they are? And things of that nature, I think, are going to become paramount.
Yeah, I'd really agree with that. And I think I had a good, instead of talking about supply chain, we have to talk about a supply web, because the reality is it's not a nice one-to-one-to-one relationship. And yeah, building those contact points. And I think Jessica made the point, just knowing who to call in a crisis and having met them beforehand and knowing who it is that you will be working with if it's one of your third parties that's having an incident before that happens. All of that kind of relationship building, again, is something that every sector can be doing and every sector can be reaching out, but those things make a huge difference. And if you've built a degree of trust and you know where those contact points are, I think that's so important in the worst case scenarios when you need those things.
Jessica, did you want to come in on the third party actor point as well, in terms of looking at this as a systemic resilience point as well?
Yeah, I think Blake's absolutely right. We have seen an increase, haven't we, in the last, 2 years plus, I would say, of what we qualify as third-party cyber events. It's really, strategic partner cyber events and organizations that we partner with closely, we being the financial sector, suffering cyber events. And, there's the contractual side of that, but then there's also the recovery and the resilience side of that. And, the guidance that I would give is, first of all, know who your third parties are, your critical third parties. In large organizations, that can be very challenging to really have a good handle on who are those third parties that we are reliant on, what level of connectivity do they have into my environment. Are we emailing them data every day, or do we have a network connection with them? Is it bi-directional? You understand your kind of ingress and egress points. And then the final piece of it is, what do they have of ours? Confidential data, PII data, is it just, is it market data using a financial reference? Like, having that really good understanding of your third parties that matter and your critical dependencies mean that on any given bad day, you can quickly get that information to then make the decisions that you need. But this is absolutely an area where there's growth. The need for a third-party inventory, a clear third-party plan and resilience plan has never been more important.
We've got a couple of minutes left, and I think, Eloise, if I start with you and I give each panelist 1 minute, some clear takeaways from your perspective from the discussion today for our audience here in the room and on the live stream as well.
Yeah, so work as a team. I think you've heard that from all of us, and repeatedly share as much as you can as soon as you can. I think, again, that's probably been something we've all said. And then practice a lot, try it often. Make it plausible, and get as broad a spectrum of people as you can involved, because the reality is that's what will happen in a crisis. You'll need a lot of different people, and so they all need to have practice and all need to know what they should be doing. I think those would be my keys.
Blake.
I would say, recognize you're not going to get it right every time, and plan for that, and develop a culture where you have naturally inquisitive individuals in your organization who can be adapted and adapt themselves to what is going on. And I think that's a really critical element of response.
Yes. I'm going to do 3 again.
Go for it.
I said at the very beginning, understanding the threat, number 1. Understand the threat to your organization. So number 2 is, how does that contextualize itself to your organization? And then number 3 is, have a plan and practice it. Mm-hmm. If you get those 3 things right, then we stand a really good chance.
Brilliant. Thank you. That has been a really practical and rich discussion. And if I was to share my 3 top takeaways from that discussion, I think the key one that came across is act now to prepare, as per the NCSE guidance. Cyber resilience is not something that we can build in the moment of a crisis. It's built in advance through investment, through people, through resources, and rehearsing. And second, test and exercise response and recovery, not just plans. It's not enough to know what you would do. It's also important to know how your people, your processes, and your technology can sustain a level of disruption for a period of time as well. And thirdly, embed resilience and collaboration into everyday days of working, whether that's pizza and a puzzle or thinking of a bad day and how you're going to get through it. It's the constant thinking through how this is not a standalone activity, but it needs to be across the business as well. And one clear message, I think, for me that underpins all of that, which is moving from rehearsal to reality is not a one-off shift, it's a continuous discipline. And I think we've all got a role to play in that. So thank you to everyone here in the room in Glasgow, to everyone joining on the last live stream, for being part of that shared effort and for joining the discussion today. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panel for a brilliant and deeply insightful discussion.